IHS, advancing decisions that advance the world.
The problem looking at sort of Libya right now and the risk to installations is that we see a warfare situation which is so quickly moving over great distances, which in a sense is classic desert warfare perhaps, but of course what we see is the three main oil ports, Sidr, Ras Lanouf and Marsa El Brega, being fought over. And you know, with that said, it's sort of impossible to say whether we will actually start seeing increased violence damaging those facilities or not. I mean, to this point, it seems when it comes to the export facilities, there's only been rather mild damage, and we have very few reports about any significant damage to oil fields further inland at all. Some looting, yes, which of course will be a hurdle when you want to set up sort of supply chains again, when there's no trucks or cars, for instance, but not any particular damage. So for now, the situation doesn't necessarily have to be a long-term one. Well, the Libyan opposition wants to start exporting as soon as possible, of course, in order to build a sustainable base to sort of strike at the Gaddafi regime from, since this seems to be potentially something which could be drawn out. But the problem is, I mean, clearly they have one of the ports, at least in safety, the far eastern one, Marsa El Hariga, where we haven't seen any fighting around it. Potentially they could produce some of the oil from the easternmost fields in the Sirte Basin. Most of Libya's oil is produced in the Sirte Basin. And from the most eastern ones, which seem to have been in the control of tribes pledging allegiance to the opposition as it is. But it's a quite complicated situation still. Will those tribes want to cut? Who actually will the opposition stick together? And of course you have international sanctions. Who wants to deal with the opposition, especially now when the Libyan government is saying, well, we will sue anybody who buys oil from anybody else than the legal NOC entity which is supposed to have monopoly in the country. It is a bit hard to say exactly who controls oil and oil facilities in Libya for the moment, and I think this is maybe what mainly rattles the oil companies. Because although some tribes have pledged allegiance to the opposition, when you look at the situation further inland, the truth is nobody seems to know very much at all. It seems like we haven't seen any fighting around oil and gas fields, but that's of course not a guarantee that that wouldn't come. And of course if the opposition would start to would manage to restart production at some of the easternmost fields and start exports perhaps and try to sell it, well then that could potentially entice the Libyan regime to try to send troops down to those particular fields and shut that stream off. So the problem here is that we know far too little, and everybody knows far too little. Uncertainty is big, and we might still see the worst things to come. Initially we've heard from both sides, but of course especially from the regime under long-term leader Muammar Gaddafi, that countries that have been unsupportive to him risk seeing oil companies from their countries losing their contracts. However, when you actually sort of look realistically at the situation, and we've seen several of even the regime's own oil people say this, everybody wants a quick restart. Libya is absolutely dependent on getting its oil export revenue back on track as soon as possible. And hence, there's kind of no viable way of doing that if you start kicking out oil companies. And that, of course, works in their favor. When we look at future opportunities, on the other hand, the picture there might be very, very different. If the Gaddafi regime survives, well, then it's quite likely that they will want to turn future opportunities to countries that were at least somewhat supportive. The opposition might, of course, feel they have a bit of a debt of gratitude, perhaps, to some other countries. But at the same time, we also need to remember that the Libyan population, after decades of rather resource nationalist indoctrination, I suppose we can call it, would have rather strong feelings if they suddenly felt that oil companies are getting deals far too easily and at far too lax terms, perhaps. So I don't think we should expect any kind of total bonanza.
IHS, advancing decisions that advance the world.